to institutionalize and facilitate collaborative work among members on climate change. Our activity lines: knowledge sharing, capacity building, access to international climate finance, joint business.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I hope you enjoy your stay here in the COP. And thank you for joining this event. This event is promoted by IFD and with other IDFC members, IFC, KfW, and BOAD, and the partner institutions that we will see here today. So recent advances on the implementation of the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and the significant increase of the volumes issued on voluntary markets since 2020 have led to a strong interest in carbon markets and a growing demand from our partners and clients. Carbon finance represents an extraordinary opportunities in terms of additional and long-term financing for mitigation projects and, more generally, development projects, as well as in terms of mobilization of the private sector and measurement of project effectiveness. However, there are still many challenges to overcome in order to turn this mechanism into functional and virtuous one that supports countries' decarbonization and SDGs trajectories. Among these challenges, it is worth mentioning absence of global architecture, regulation, the issue of social and economic benefits at local level. As you know, you are here in the temple of IDFC, which is where we have the PDBs, all the PDBs. And the question here is to understand what could be the role of PDBs in helping to overcome these challenges. This is exactly the topic of today. And we will explore the potential position of PDBs on this market and discuss possible common principles of intervention. So the side event today will be divided in four times. The first, we will have the presentation from Alex Mikhailova, who is the very famous carbon expert, who will make us the presentation and put the scene of our discussion. Then we will have three panels. The first panel will be, we will hear from development banks, their investment, their strategies, their operations. In the second panel, we will get inputs and experience from two countries and one regional initiative, hopefully. And finally, in the third panel, international eminent experts will explore the integrity of carbon finance, both on demand and supply side, and possibly give few recommendations to development banks and how to engage them more. After this each session, we will take the time for questions from our panelists and the audience. So now I invite Alex to the stage to make us the first presentation.
Thank you. So I'm really happy to speak here at the IDFC Pavilion. I've been part of IDFC events in the past COPs, and of course I, in my function as senior founding partner of Perspectives, have been collaborating with a number of MDBs in the context of carbon markets in the past. So I hope, no. Good. Now, well, just here for those who have not been following the carbon markets, we have Article 6.2, the bilateral approaches that are not subject to international rules, other than reporting, of course. And we have the 6.4 mechanism, which is the successor of the CDM, which is supervised by a body that has been starting its operations 15 months ago, and which, of course, will probably become the scene setter of the compliance markets under the Paris Agreement. The important thing, which is also pervading the negotiations here, is the interaction between the compliance market under Article 6 and the voluntary carbon market. The voluntary carbon market has had a really gold rush situation since 2019 until around 2022, but it has seen a very difficult period since then. And now under Article 6, there is the possibility for governments actually to bring voluntary carbon credits into the compliance world through the authorization of credits that come from the voluntary carbon market. And the negotiations that are happening at this time are exactly about to what degree should voluntary markets actually be directly brought into Article 6, or whether they should remain separate from Article 6. And of course, there are many who fear that the voluntary carbon market providers like Verra, Global Carbon Council and others might be seen as contaminating the compliance markets because, you've heard about the scandals that have been plaguing the voluntary carbon market in the past 12 months. And the question, of course, is now, how should MDBs behave in that situation? Should MDBs help the voluntary carbon market providers to become able to generate the level of quality that they actually can become a positive force in the context of the compliance market under Article 6? Or should the MDBs concentrate on providing the backbone for governments to actually run the compliance markets without have to make recourse to voluntary carbon market providers? Now here we have timelines. These, of course, were the ideal timelines that we wanted under the negotiations. And as we speak, the negotiations are at a deadlock, I would say, under Article 6. The mood in the room yesterday evening was very tense. And there have, of course, been made the classical links, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And especially for the Article 6.4, it may be another lost year. And of course, the longer we have a lost year for the 6.4, the more it becomes likely that we'll see a plethora of very far differing approaches for the Article 6.2. And of course, a loss of trust in international carbon markets in general. I've been working on international carbon market for the last 30 years. And I think we now have sufficient experience to understand what is a good carbon credit and what is a bad one. And a good carbon credit can only be generated if the underlying activity is additional. I can't stress this enough. If there's a doubt about additionality, then the trust will be eroded. And I've sometimes seen MDB approaches to international carbon market that have not been fully in line with the additionality principle. So you can't just reframe your pipeline and then get the carbon credits. So you really need to make a clear case why the projects actually need revenues from carbon markets and why they are going beyond the bread and butter mill of the normal project pipelines that MDB support. Then the second approach, and this is really reinforced by the scandals on the voluntary carbon market, is the conservativeness of the baseline. The big fall of the voluntary carbon market that we've seen, 90% of price decrease this year, was triggered by doubts about the baseline for avoided deforestation projects. Then it was followed by doubts about the baseline for cook stove projects, the famous fraction of non-renewable biomass, and so on. So as long as you can't explain to somebody in the street what a credible baseline is, as long as that, you will have a problem with the credibility of your carbon credits. And I have been developing methodologies myself for 20 years now, even more. And I know how difficult it was to bring them through the CDM procedure, but I think that was a good precedent to understand, that a baseline methodology is a very valuable good and it needs to be protected. And if there is the slightest doubt that it's not conservative, we have a real problem. Now, here I just give the list of the principles of Article 6.4 from Glasgow. I think these principles are excellent, and they are going much beyond the principles that we have under the CDM. So alignment with the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, meaning at a date when a host country needs to have a net zero, then there should not be the possibility to generate any emission reduction credits anymore, because their country will need them for net zero. For removals, it may be different. And that's, of course, now one big fight in the supervisory body. Similarly, that the baseline no longer should reflect business as usual, but should be adjusted downwards. So it needs to be lower. That's a break from the principle we had under the CDM, where we tried to identify business as usual as good as possible. And of course, as said, additionality is the cornerstone. And also there the new definition is good, because it says we need to look at the incentive from the carbon market, whether it mobilizes a project. Previously, we had the circular definition and just looking at the absence of the project, but not asking why is the project actually happening. Sorry, this is good. I want to get into some technological nitty-gritties, because I think now we have the opportunity to make use of the body of work of 20 years. Hundreds of methodologies, for example, baselines and monitoring, have been developed. We shouldn't throw these methodologies away, but we need to make them Article 6 proof. And at Perspectives, we have been leading an initiative which is called International Initiative for Article 6 Methodology Tools. We've developed a tool that now reflects the new additionality definition. We have developed a tool that reflects the new baseline definitions. These tools have been made available now earlier this year. And with these tools, we want to build the bridge from the CDM to Article 6 without now losing a decade in setting up the new methodologies from scratch, because that, of course, would lead to a valley of death, and we don't want to have this valley of death. So we've had 1 year of first a conceptual phase, then a phase in which the tools were developed, and currently we are embarking on an actual testing phase, where fortunately we have the support of the government of Japan, the government of Germany, government of the UK, and we have a group of international experts, all from institutions who don't have an interest in carbon credits, to actually test those methodologies. Now, of course, I won't repeat the crunch issues, but all we have here on the table is still contested, and I hope the presidency will be able to pull the rabbit from the hat and save this text, because otherwise Article 6.4 has lost another year. What could be the future of the international carbon market? I see two futures. The one would be the voluntary market dies off. It would die off like the CDM has died off. And 1 year ago, I would have thought this likelihood for that scenario is maybe 20–30%. Now I think the likelihood is 50–60% and growing, because the voluntary market people are not getting their act together. I, of course, heard the initiatives that have been launched here at the COP, but they need to be filled with life. If these initiatives are successful, but only if, then the voluntary carbon markets could be nicely collaborating with the compliance markets to actually scale up and reach the ambition level we need for 2030. We also, of course, need to see the governments interfering. We've seen the US Financial Service Commission come up with a rule proposal. We see also governments in host countries, governments in buyer countries starting to regulate more and more. So with that, I would like to thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Alex. Are you optimistic about the outcome of the negotiation on the Article 6? I'm going now to turn about to the other colleagues here present for the first panel on discussion. I would like to invite Hemen. Hemen Boutou, you are the Climate Risk Manager at IFC. IFC is for African Finance Corporation. Please come to the stage. Peter Hegels from the KfW. You are the head of the Competence Center on Climate and Energy at KfW. Mubarak is not. And Romain Chabrol, Senior Biodiversity Expert from IFD. We have unfortunately one expert which is not yet here. Maybe we'll join it later. So I will ask you a few questions about the subject, and kindly request you to maybe to reply in 3 to 5 minutes so we can have time for other discussion. So I start with Hemen. IFC is willing to explore carbon finance. And what is the rationale behind that? What is the interest of African Corporation, which is a bank working in many countries in Africa, to deal with this topic?
Thank you very much for the question. So at AFC, we're just developing the strategy for our carbon markets approach, and the reason is varied. On the continent there is sort of a feeling that the continent is not really being seen in light as a solutions provider. It's being seen in the light of just aid gulping continent, right? But people feel that the Congo, for example, which is the last remaining large rainforest that still sequesters carbon globally, and has the peatlands in the Congo, for example, have sequestered over 29 billion tons of CO2 over a period of a few decades, which is 3 times the global GHG emissions. So you see the potential to sequester, and you look at the revenue from carbon markets on the continent is extremely low. So those are sort of the backbone, the driving force behind AFC's approach. And also we see our clients, which are small private entities, but also sovereigns, trying to see how they can shore up revenues. Capital is sometimes expensive on the continent. Budgets are already constrained. And so in order to get more access to capital and financing to do more in terms of climate adaptation in particular, because as we know, some of these places are already being hit by climate change today. And they already have competing trade-offs. You have education, you have healthcare, you have nutrition. And so in order to get this additional finance, a carbon market is one of the ways that we're looking to support. But what we're really seeing is challenges. On the project side, some of our projects, come into challenges, and a good one is additionality, as Alex was just mentioning. And so a project based in an African country where the government sort of aggregates carbon credits nationally and also has legal recommendation for, say, sustainable logging, can no longer claim additionality because you need to do it. It's legally, binding on you to do the project, and so that's already lost revenue for them. But they also, in our case study, we looked at one of our best projects, actually, a platform company called Arise, and one of the challenges they're having is they're also being faced with the problem of people looking at carbon credits from Africa to be lower, to cost lower, so to say, right? And so they're arguing, the initial thought process around carbon credits is if a project sequesters 1 ton of carbon anywhere in the world, it's 1 ton of carbon, right? So they're also having those kind of challenges. And the IMF famously, I think 2 years ago, or 1 year ago actually, had a paper that sort of set a price floor for carbon, right? And they were looking at it as a backbone to ensuring net zero by 2050. They have a $70 price floor, which is an average, but they've also segmented that into lower income economies, middle income economies, and higher income economies. And it's $25 per ton for lower income economies. And even at that price, I doubt there's been any African country that has been able to sell. So that's even a high price for even low income economies, right? So these are some of the, the thought process behind AFC trying to, go into the carbon market. And finally, I would say also, so we also have projects that, again, like I said, are trying to position themselves as solution providers. A good example is critical minerals. Now, we know critical minerals are very helpful for the net zero transition and electrification, but they're also existing in mining, which is a hard to abate industry, right? So for some of these projects, even within AFC, you can see how some projects generate credits, some projects need to buy credits, and so that might be also some of the thought process as much as is viable and credible. Some projects, even within just AFC's platform, will be looking to, trade credits, but also to be able to bring those projects that are trying to sell credits, to the international markets, to credible verifying agencies that they don't have access to, or to even build knowledge, because as we're starting, some of the challenges is a resource problem, it's a knowledge gap, right? So for example, AFC owns the largest renewable energy platform on the continent, Lekela. In 2021, Lekela avoided 2.1 million tons of CO2. But we don't, it's a solar project and it's a renewable project, solar and wind, right? And we don't really have a strong, say, pathway of what to do with those credits yet. We're still, what's the best solution? Should they make more money from it? Should they try to, what should they really do? And these are some of the challenges that are coming up. And to end, maybe I would say this now, but if there's another time during the session, I might expand on it. Some of the challenges, especially with nature-based carbon credits, is say, land. So if you exist in a country where the government owns land, but the community also owns the land, and then the project has a concession, and they're the ones doing the sustainable logging, maintaining the forest, who owns the carbon credits? How do you equitably share those carbon credits? What do you do with the social fallout that emerges when there's a dispute on those carbon credits and the forest concessions and all of that? So these are some of the challenges, and that's why we're trying to ask the questions now to see how we can, as we're building, as we're developing the methodologies and the frameworks, we would think about it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and I suppose that since you are working in more than 20 countries, you have also some kind of specific action in different countries which are not at the same level of development or the same kind of challenges about CO2 emission. Now I'm going to turn back to Peter. Peter, so you had the head of competence of the KfW, and KfW is not anymore
head of competence. I like that.
Head of competence center, sorry, for climate and energy. KF is not new in the business of carbon finance, but you are now moving quickly, and I understand, with a great initiative on the forests, the WALD initiative. Maybe before to present it, what is also the rationale behind this acceleration of the movement from KfW, and maybe to say a few words about this great initiative.
Yes, thank you very much. With pleasure. So to make it easy, they call me Chief Climate Officer, so there's no competence in there, so it's just Chief. So our story is a little different from yours. First of all, what Mustafa was mentioning, that we have had our hands into the CDM market for 10 years or so. Yeah, so there was a time when KfW built some competence, supporting projects and linking projects to buyers, and somehow, making sure that German companies could buy CDM credits until it all collapsed, and we dismantled this operation. And whatever knowledge is there is now only existing in a few remaining staff who are still with KfW and who we are now bringing back together to make use of that knowledge. So it's a handful of people, not much. But the current, say, additional activity that we have started is actually coming from the question, how could KfW actually help improve carbon pricing in the world? Yeah, so we are not coming from the certificate side, but we're coming from the carbon pricing side, yeah, because we know as economists and bankers, a price on a product really makes a difference, and we've seen it in Europe that having ETS that is actually working and generating high prices makes a difference in business cases and actually leads to decarbonization in Europe or contributes to it. And so the big question is, why is it happening in Europe and not in other places? And could we as a public development bank play a role in making it happen somewhere else? Yeah, so it's a much broader agenda and also highly political, of course. And it links to the CBAM that Europe has introduced, the EU has introduced, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, yeah, so which brings trade flows into the question, into the picture as a point, yeah, where countries start thinking about the inherent carbon footprint that they have in the products, yeah, which are priced now. So this is the picture, and so we started looking at what is happening out there. Of course, the VCM was pretty active, as Axel was presenting just now, and it also, I wouldn't say collapsed, but it really went into a spiral, into a downturn. And we looked at Article 6 as well, yeah, as an ongoing initiative, and how does this all play together? Yeah? So we really don't have the answer, yeah, but we have some priorities. And I would say for us, A priority, carbon pricing. B priority, decarbonization contribution. C priority would be mobilizing funds, mobilizing capital from private sector for investment in developing countries. So in that order. And any activity that only mobilizes money but doesn't have a decarb impact, we wouldn't support. Yeah. So that's really clear for us. Yeah. So any VCM activity where we don't believe that it's contributing to decarbonization shouldn't be supported by KfW. So, and one pilot activity, that's what you're referring to, the WALD. WALD is actually a German word, means forest, yeah, but the abbreviation is the Worldwide Alliance for Land-Based Decarbonization, WALD. That's a fund that has been designed and created and should be launched beginning of next year, which will provide project funding for project developers who want to do carbon removal projects, nature-based carbon removals. And we are trying to attract investors into that fund, so we are mobilizing money from the German government for that fund. And we're trying to attract investors that have signed SBTI. That's a precondition to invest in the fund, and who also commit to a certain utilization of the removal certificates that will be generated at some point from this fund, so that we have a high quality and that it pays into the decarbonization goal that I was explaining. So that's basically the structure that we're having in mind. So it's going to be two funds. One is an innovation fund, which is a little smaller, so for trying new stuff that hasn't been done so much. And the other one is more for, say, established nature-based carbon removal activities in forestry, which should happen globally. I mean, it's really open. It's a competition. Will be a competition that we will launch at some point next year to find these projects, and then of course, hopefully, attract some SBTI listed investors who would contribute to that. So that's the KfW story so far.
Thank you, Peter. I realized that Hemen and you talk about the nature, which is very, very important. The WALD project is about nature. You also mentioned the importance of nature-based solutions and also decarbonization among forests. And I see also that in IFD, the biodiversity is also important. And maybe I would like you also to tell us more about that. Why you are choosing the nature and biodiversity as basis for the entry of IFD in the carbon market, Romain?
Yes, thank you, Mustafa. Yes, it's very interesting the point of view expressed so far, because we are all not in the same situation, but with different approaches depending on our portfolio and main country operations. So I think it's a very interesting discussion. Well, at AFD, what we realized last year is that we were at a kind of crossroads, and this crossroad that lasted too long. So we were like stuck, maybe. So we had to move. Moving at AFD is very simple. It implies a working group and maybe a kind of position doctrine, so that we move further. So this is a work we've been doing this last 6 months, just realizing that things were changing fast. With as Axel mentioned, a boom in 2021 and partly confirmed in 2022. So we had to do something, considering also that we had demands from our partners and clients. And the conviction is now shared between the different entities of the group that there is a potential. It doesn't say precisely yet what we will be doing, but we are all certain that there is a potential. Regarding this potential and the opportunities of the mechanism, I'd like to add maybe one point that has not been said so far is what I find very interesting in carbon credits is the principle of payment for results, which is in ODA pretty new, and I think quite interesting, because it's payment for results, and the more successful the project is, depending on the indicators, the more payments it will get. So this is, I think, a very interesting point, and maybe a turning point in ODA. So this is very interesting, and it's linked with other sorts we have, notably on blue bonds, green bonds, where there is this same reflection about MRV mechanism. So I think this is an interesting point. Regarding challenges, you mentioned, all of you, already many of them. We are at AFD very, just like UM, very concerned about ownership of the credits and the mechanism for benefit sharing that could be very derived from data. Very, very interested in that. And of course, we are also, as we work only at AFD with the public sector, we are thinking about what we could do regarding national strategies on carbon pricing or implementation of Article 6. So what could be some maybe public policy loan regarding the carbon pricing or carbon markets. So what we have decided so far at AFD is a kind of roadmap with a pilot phase from now till 25. And this pilot phase is very simple. It implies research. Jadiga will mention this later on, but also a few opportunity studies or feasibility studies. I'm afraid Axel mentioned that public development banks should not reframe their portfolio. I'm afraid this is a little bit what we've been doing so far, but this is an interesting phase in case, because we need to, we don't have at AFD at this stage a dedicated expertise, so we need to work on this. And hopefully after this pilot phase, we will have internal expertise, maybe an internal team and capacities to offer to our clients and countries a dedicated offer on carbon pricing and carbon markets. Just to finish and conclude, we have, just like KfW as well, agreed on a few investment principles regarding carbon credits. The first of these principles is trying to link carbon, biodiversity, and community. And so this implies prioritizing nature-based solution project, for sure. So this is, I think, a very important point, because, again, Axel mentioned it, there are still a lot of problems regarding transparency, governance, additionality. So we are convinced that having a kind of SDG approach helps us to have a more consolidated and more robust mechanism. So carbon, biodiversity, and community. The second, of course, is decarbonization. So how can it be linked with ambitious NDC and ambitious national strategies? This is a very strong point as well. The third is, of course, integrity of the demand and reference to SBTI or VCMI standards. So the idea is to work only with with the partners that would be engaged in this kind of with this kind of standards. The fourth on the supply side is also to refer to the main and the most demanding recommendation, let's say ICVC MI, or on more sectorial approach, the guidelines developed by Conservation International on blue carbon, a very interesting principle as well. So, and maybe the two last ones, the fifth is to try as much as possible to rely and straighten on local expertise. We have one of the challenges we haven't mentioned yet is that on all the value chains, there is only a very small part of the value staying in the country because it is very technical, because it needs a lot of expertise, and the most important part of the value is kept by international consultancies working on feasibility, on MRV, and on assessing and auditing the project. So straightening local expertise is very important. And the last principle, of course, we know that carbon credit will never be a silver bullet. So we are also, of course, looking at other mechanisms under the big umbrella payment for ecosystem service. France is, with the UK-France initiative on the biodiversity credits, is working on this as well, and this is something we will follow as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Romain. Since there is one panelist, less panelists than we should not have, maybe there is time for one question, short question and short response also. I'm sure that the audience is curious about, as I am, about, we are here in IDFC banks. We like figures to understand if you have any targets in terms of volume and investments in your strategies so far. Maybe we can start with the Emen, if you want to provide.
Short answer, no, not yet.
So very short question, response, thank you.
I'm afraid it will be the same for us. So the only commitment we have is to work on about 10 feasibility studies a year. So it's not a commitment in figures or.
Yeah, same here. No quantitative targets. What we're actually trying to start now is what we call a process of use case identification. So not only in the financial cooperation part of the bank where I'm working, but also in the other parts of the bank. So the international commercial financing, the private sector arm, and even the domestic arm. Yeah, we're all coming together to identify use cases. So it's really up in the air. Yeah, apart from Wald, what could be? There's one use case that's already being developed that is using wood as building material. Yeah, so that's one which we are also working on. Yeah, which is of course now not linked really to certificates or carbon pricing, but it's part of this. Yeah, storing carbon somewhere, and if it's a building, it's good as well.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Romain and Emen for this session. I think that we can applaud them. So I'm now going to ask to the other panelists, the second session, to come to the stage. So we should have, I don't think he's still here, Papa Lamine, no? So Daniel is not here so well, okay. So I think that the second session will be very short, I'm afraid. So let's start with the third session, Omar. Yeah, okay. So Axel, who I'm not going to present again, please come to the stage. And good morning to Will Turner, and please if you can come to the stage. So Will Turner, you are the Senior Vice President of Natural Climate Solutions at CI, Conservation International. Seon Park, good morning. So you please come to the stage. You are coming from the Standards Association at the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative. That's right. Thank you for being here. And Jijika Kashenura from IFD. You are economist researcher at IFD, in the research department of IFD. Thank you all for being here. So we have also 3 questions and the same rules to have to try to reply in 3 to 5 minutes, please. So I will start with Axel. What is your we talk. You explained us before the situation in terms of the Article 6 and what do you think the impact on PDBs and how the PDBs in their role as a local institution, financial institution, can play in helping the implementation and to be a major actor of the market, the carbon market? Do you think that there's a role, and what could be this role?
Yeah, I'm giving a historical example because when I was getting into the carbon markets, the PDBs were frontrunners. The World Bank came up in the late 1990s with the concept of the prototype carbon fund. And that was actually the first real and large-scale approach to make international carbon markets work. And I'm hearing similar ideas now more than 25 years later. So it shows that the concept at that point in time was quite nice, and it actually really brought in private sector to get into, well, putting up funding for doing initial ERPAs, emission reduction purchase agreements. The exercise was highly transparent, and I really regret that the World Bank actually did not keep this. Now it's much more difficult to find information on the World Bank's carbon market engagement compared to that time. So I would really like the PDBs to come back to this pioneering role. And well, I must say, I find it really interesting that all the PDBs that have been talking now in the first round of this event have been focusing on nature-based solutions, on removals, and yeah, I'm wondering, is this really what we need from PDBs? Shouldn't we get into decarbonization of the building sector in middle-income countries, which is the place where the emissions skyrocket as populations shift from living in shacks to living in high-rise buildings? I find the approaches a bit timid, I must confess. And I would really want to see the upscaling. Well, the World Bank, again, of course, they have been trying to lead the pack through the so-called transformative carbon asset facility, where they want to do upscaling of carbon crediting through policy-based crediting. But the TCAF, as it's called short, it has now been working for 5 years, and or even more. It has got one single approach: removal of energy subsidies in Uzbekistan. Yeah, well, I'm not so convinced that this is what I want actually to see. I would invite the PDBs to become bolder. If we want to really upscale the international carbon markets to the billions of tons that we need to close the gap, and you've read the UNEP gap report, it's stubbornly high over the last 10 years. We need to bring it down. We hear the negotiators debating the global stocktake text and all. I would like to see a bolder approach that addresses the real challenges. And the real challenges are not nature-based solutions in developing countries.
Thank you very much for this very frank point of view, Axel. I think you're right that the PDBs can play, and you mentioned the World Bank, but the World Bank is a specific institution with a lot of capacity, and we recognize that the role they provide in the financial markets and the financial carbon market in the past was amazing. But I turn now to Will Turner, and maybe you can tell us how, because you work a lot on the standards, and how we can help this bank, because there is a problem of capacity, the problem of standards, and you work a lot on that in CI. How could you help the PDBs to improve and to be, ready to engage in this carbon market? Because it's necessary to have this basis before to go further.
Thank you very much. I think as a conservation organization, I think it's first important to point out that we believe that any credible strategy to solve climate change and avoid the worst impacts of climate change requires decarbonization of energy and industry, including high rises, pursuing new technologies to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and better stewarding the biosphere, which happens to be the thing that we are very good at, but we need all of those. And an important part of that is that those can't substitute for one another on a planetary scale. You have to have all of them. The second thing I'd like to bring in here is more related to this idea of high quality. Why is it that we need to talk about high quality? Well, again, I'm a scientist, so going back to what is actually needed, there are a variety of actions that are needed to mitigate climate change globally, and they vary wildly in cost. And from this basic fact, you can, if you look at what it would mean to allow emissions trading, be they IPMOs, offsets, whatever it is, the transfer of emissions among entities and among space, you can achieve the same amount of mitigation for much less cost. Wait a second, that's not what we want. We need to achieve much more mitigation for the same cost. Those two are two different scenarios, but they arise from that same observation that the cost of mitigation varies in space and mitigation actions vary in space. The difference between that is getting the rule set right so that we actually get the value of that variation in cost, so we get massively more mitigation and a prayer of having a stable climate for future generations. So what that means is high quality, and that means end-to-end integrity from the supply end to the demand end. It means projects that deliver verifiable and additional reductions and removals. And at the demand end, it means carbon credits sold to companies that, or other entities which are decarbonizing their own emissions in line with what's required to avoid the most dangerous impacts of climate change, science-based targets or similar. And getting those two things right is what high quality is, and that's how we win. So let's take a concrete example. A few years ago, my organization, Conservation International, supported local communities and other organizations in developing the world's first blue carbon project in Cispata in Colombia. It's called Villa Manglar. It was the first to enter the carbon market in a way that actually, with a methodology that recognizes the full value of coastal blue carbon ecosystems, in particular the dense soil carbon, huge quantities of soil carbon that accumulate over hundreds of years in these ecosystems. The way this project was set up, you have carbon revenue comes in, it finances training, it finances hydrological restoration, monitoring of carbon biodiversity, and sustainable livelihoods for the communities that total some 12,000 people in this landscape that are the stewards of these ecosystems. And in this case, the vast majority of revenue is either subsidizing, or not subsidizing, is supporting those livelihoods, entering to payments to community members, or otherwise retained in these communities. And for Conservation International, this is a very important factor, and it's distinguishing from a lot of actors in this space. We believe that this is possible, that conducting these kinds of projects is possible in a way where half or more of all the carbon revenue is retained in these communities, not distributed as benefits, but retained in these communities because they were the ones that stewarded it in the first place. It's important to recognize that the integrity of carbon markets has come into question. There's been scrutiny around the lack of standards. There's been scrutiny around projects that are bad projects and underperforming, and around companies that are misusing the offsets that come from these projects. That scrutiny is really important, and it is welcome. We need to look at that and recognize the importance of evolving these standards and the capacity to prevent these misuses from undermining the enormous climate value of if we get this right. So how do we see the evolution of these standards? Well, with Villa Manglar in Colombia, the principles it applied in the development of this project have since become the basis of the high-quality blue carbon principles that were formally published last year. That's safeguard nature, that's empower communities, use rigorous carbon accounting, operate with local governance and mobilize high integrity capital. In Conservation International's case, that not only means abiding by SBI targets, we don't accept investment or carbon offtake from fossil fuel companies. More recently, we've seen broader development of the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, the ICVCM, and their core carbon principles, which are extraordinarily important on the supply side, and the Voluntary Carbon Markets Initiative, Integrity Initiative, VCMI, and their value in defining what integrity looks like on the demand end. And it's been really heartening to see these standards progressing and working together here at the COP. I think we're going to be really important. And then also at this COP, we're seeing a lot of progress and discussion, well, mixed progress on Article 6, which of course is the broader context beyond the voluntary carbon market that's going to be so critical in mobilizing resources going forward. Finalizing the rule book for Article 6 is going to be critical. But within that, it's important that countries be, particularly under 6.2, not only meet the letter of Article 6, but meet it ambitiously. And I think on the bright side, we've seen Singapore in particular sign multiple MOUs where they are requiring that those that they trade with not only meet the letter of 6.2, but abide by solid international standards, outside verification, and in the red space, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, using standards that involve jurisdictional approaches that help to reduce issues like leakage and additionality, such as JRM and the art trees standard. And I think it's by putting those kinds of things together, we're going to see the creation of the conditions for really robust and effective carbon markets going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Thank you very much. And we heard all that the importance of the integrity and the quality of the carbon market. And I think that's also more maybe on the voluntary market. And you, Sean Park, you are working on this at the voluntary markets integrity initiative, which is at the heart. How can we help to overcome this constraints of the compliance, and also the fact that there is a reluctance of people about carbon market because of this question of integrity. There is a lot of fear of greenwashing around that, and how you help on that, your organization help on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions, and really nice to hear the support from the nature conservation. So as I feel like I'm just wrapping up what you've just said, but by building the integrity into the voluntary carbon market, it's not just about scaling up the market. It's about with the integrity, the corporate buyers, the project development, all the stakeholders in the voluntary carbon markets are confident and builds the trust within the transactions. And also, in the end, this will scale up significantly, scale up the private finance, what we ultimately wanted to go. So I think I prepared a presentation, but maybe I could just...
No, we have the time for pass
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah, please.
I
think there's a presentation. Come in. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just prepared presentation as a Homer sitting right there, asked me to summarize like a bit of 100 pages of document in 6 minutes. This is forward. Okay. I just wanted to briefly explain what VCMI has been doing to build the integrity of the voluntary carbon market. For whom you may not have heard of the organizations, as the name tells, VCMI is a voluntary carbon market integrity initiative that works on building the integrity of the market. We have 2 main streams of work. First is claims code of practice for the corporates, and second is access strategy toolkit for the countries. So related to this session, Public Development Bank is situated in between the public sector and the private sector's finance, which this document will navigate what the role of the Public Development Bank's role is. Just a quick run through of the documents. First is claims code of practice. It's for the corporates to provide guidance on how companies can credibly use the credits and how they should claim. So the document itself consists of 4 steps to make a VCMI claim. VCMI claim ensures the integrity of the market by requiring companies to meet the foundation criteria, and the companies must use the high quality credits. So basically the foundation criteria is kind of a similar approach with what the KfW have taken. It's basically about companies showing additional effort, making an effort for the decarbonizations, and also showing their efforts beyond and above it. And next, company would select a VCMI claim. We have 2 different types of claim. One is carbon integrity claims and scope 3 flexibility claim, which we launched as a beta version. So each claim has a different threshold of carbon credits. So a company would choose which claim they would like to make, and the company would purchase and retire the credits. So for the quality standards, we follow the ICVCM's core carbon principles. Using the high quality credits means, as mentioned before, the emissions reduction that company claim is real, verified, and not only has a mitigations effect, but also makes contribute to the sustainable development in the host countries. So a company could finally make a VCMI claim through the claims reporting platform on our website. Okay. Presentation slide has not been updated, but skipping the part as this one relates to our session more. So ultimately, what we want to achieve is to scaling of the private finance through the voluntary carbon markets. So according to recent research from the CPI Climate Policy Initiatives, we must need to increase the climate finance 5 times more than the current level every year. And through the newly introduced VCMI claim, we conducted a research, and then it tells that the new claim could create $19 billion of additional finance where it is most urgently needed. And this is the figures that would support how the voluntary carbon markets could bring the climate finance to where we need it right now. Second part is about the VCMI's access strategies. So I guess many of people know that VCMI work on the corporate side, but doesn't really know about the access strategy toolkit. So I'm glad to introduce what we've been doing. So we have a VCMI access strategy program, and alongside we have a country contact group, which consists of 50 policymakers. So this is a guidance for the countries to how to understand and access the high integrity carbon markets. And we had incredible input from the Climate Focus and UNDP, bringing their field experience from their technical assistant program. Lastly, very delighted to share that this publication was released during the COP. The major audience for this is the philanthropic funders of how to make the impact, impactful support of engaging countries into the carbon markets, and into the carbon market. So from this two document. It provides a clear message of how Public Development Bank could engage in the high integrity carbon markets. In the national level, in the nationally speaking, public PDB identifying what is the objective of the countries trying to engage with the voluntary carbon market? Is it for the NDC or is it for the other international mitigation purposes? And making sure that countries have a carbon market policy that aligns with this objective, and the PDB providing a finance to do so would be crucial. And if it comes to the corporate level, a lot of people overlook this side, but as we echoed in the Claims Code of Practice, identifying if the companies inside what is the companies inside the countries trying to use the credits? What is the purpose of the companies outside the countries trying to use the credits? Is the project that the company invests is inside the NDC or outside the NDC, whether it needs authorization or not? This kind of technical factors should be taken into account when designing how the PDB support the countries in the carbon market activities. Lastly, about the project developers. So I personally come from the project developing background. Carbon market has a unique market structure that the developers take the economic return in the end of the project, which means project developers have to risk the cost in the early development stage. So PDB identifying the high quality carbon project, which has emissions reductions but also co-benefits to continue their projects, and also find connecting the investors in the project developer would be crucial. So in conclusion, the PDB has a crucial role to connect the high integrity and the supply and demand side of a high integrity carbon market. Thank you.
Thank you, Soen. And coming back now to Jessica, and you are economist at the Department of Research of IFD, and it is your role to look at the things, to look at the big picture. Yeah. And I understand that you realized a study on the carbon markets. And could you tell us more about this study and what is the objective of this study, and what is talking about, and what are the conclusions, if you can share, and how you can this conclusion could be useful for the public development banks in engaging in this market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. We'll preface my my presentation today with a big thank for Romain, who made this, I think, today's event. And considering it from the supply and demand side, I think it's an important one. I will come back to it. And I will also greet Axel, who made, I think it's really the most shorter and insightful and balanced presentation I have seen within this COP. I have attended to a lot, so thank you, Axel. To come back to my research, I did within the research department participated to support IFD journey in entering those markets. So we tried at which is a policy research department, to see it as a market, from the theoretical point of view. So obviously we look at it from the supply and the demand side. So, as you know, I will try to make it not in theoretical perspective and to make it very transparent. So, Marcus, Paris Agreement is built up upon bottom-up perspective. So the demand side, which is driven by offsets on the carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets at least. And without having SBTi's commitment, for example. So obviously, and having this market traded as a commodity market, as like a tangible commodity market, which is not, it's an intangible commodity market. So if at the end of the day, the buyer just want to buy 1 ton of CO2 minus to offset, so this will obviously harm the supply side, getting the cheapest price there. So this is one of our conclusions, how to make the market not operating as a tangible commodity market. So I think this is a key point. And I would greet also VCMI, who announced recently at the COP, correct me if I'm wrong, considering the demand side also with the SBTi and thinking about it. And on Article 6 as well, I think Axel is more aware about this. On the demand side, I think there is the supervisory board has taken this to next year to consider the demand side as well. So I think this is a big piece to not be ignored. And so right now, at least in this, the way if it's driven by offset processes, actually we just end up with projects being subordinated to market prices. I think that the supply side should not be subordinated to the minimum prices, which are not based on integrity demand side. And to come back to public development banks and multilateral development banks, I think first on the multilateral development banks and at country level, I think countries need first to build up a strategy on carbon markets. Why? Because we have more and more interoperability in markets, domestic and external, compliance and voluntary markets. So we cannot ignore that if just we project ourselves in like 10 years, 5 years, if carbon is priced or is priced within trade. So this is, I think, a question from to incorporate in national strategies. What does it mean from them to have a world where carbon is priced for their competitiveness? So I think it's a very broad picture to be considered. I think it's a very important point, whether to export their mitigation outcomes or having more domestic utilization of it. So, and also I would come back to the national development banks. I think national development bank, in the same way that they have a counter-cyclical mandate, they have also a mandate on long-term national strategies. So they need, I think the way they need to enter on carbon markets need to be fitted to the national development strategies. And so not just, I think, considering, like sometimes I heard from people I discuss here, having short-term funding through carbon markets. I think it's a wrong way of doing it and considering it on a global picture. What else? I think also the way they can do it is operating as a clearing house and getting minimum requirement for the demand side and maybe building up a domestic market before just at least, you know, to have the right integrity on the demand and supply side. And yeah, so I think these are my key takeaways. I hope that was clear. And I was also happy to have the KfW colleague who has left, considering, for example, to have commitment from SBTi from the demand side, which is, for example, an example of minimum requirement on the demand side. Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Jessica. So I would like just maybe to thank all the panelists. We have some times and we have we can ask some additional questions. But first, I would like to applaud our panel colleagues. So the question will be around all those who are still here, and I see that we maybe Robin, maybe you can join here because you were part of the. Hemen is still there, or maybe he left? He left. Okay. So maybe some question. The first question maybe go to Axel, since he has the micro, so he can keep it. It's the first question is about the role of the countries. Maybe it's important to know that, of course, for the carbon markets, it should be two actors. I mean, the international commitment of these countries is important. How do you see the negotiation around that, and what are for you the next steps for the countries to work together to make this market available? What are the constraints to date, and how do you see them to be overcome in the future?
We've now worked in the past couple of years on regional alliances for carbon markets and climate finance in both West Africa and East Africa. Now the concept is expanded to the Caribbean. And we see, of course, that regional South-South exchange of experiences is absolutely crucial to actually enable countries to understand what's happening, because we need to be very clear. Governmental institutions, they of course have some level of distrust if suddenly 50 carbon project developers queue in line of the Environment Ministry office and want to get carbon credits. You may have heard about this company Blue Carbon from the city. We are currently having our conference that goes to African countries and gets carbon rights for 10% of their forest land. So they have now accumulated 2.5 million square kilometers forest land for carbon rights. And that, of course, generates a lot of doubts. So what we need is that host countries can actually understand what the different forms of carbon market means, and it's complicated. I myself am struggling after 30 years of working in this. Which is this new initiative? What is that new initiative? Why do we have two initiatives, ICVCM, VCMI? For anyone outside, it looks arcane. Why don't they collaborate more strongly? Good, we see now collaboration, but it's extremely difficult landscape to understand. So we need to give the host countries the possibility to understand that they don't just sign away carbon rights that may a few years later or even a few months later be seen as giving away the national wealth for a trifle, like in early gold rushes, people were giving away claims that then later yielded millions. So I think, and that's of course a very important task for PDBs to help with that. To not be an interested party, and now I'm giving one example, it's very long ago, but it really struck me in Tunisia in 2005. I was there invited by the National Authority for CDM. I was giving a presentation on the state of the carbon market, and then there was a World Bank colleague who was making a big presentation why the Tunisia should sell the carbon credits for $4 to the World Bank. And I thought, shouldn't the World Bank help Tunisia to get the best price instead of trying to undercut the price? So yeah, I think PDBs should be very careful in providing the right services to the host countries to actually increase their capacity and not try to play the market themselves.
Thanks to Axel. It's very interesting to hear that. Maybe another question for you, Axel, just maybe on, because since you have the mic, is about the use of the Article 6 by Europe. Do you think that Europe will be a major actor on that?
Well, Switzerland is a European country. It's not part of the European Union, but it's a front runner in Article 6 utilization. It now has more than a dozen bilateral agreements. It has this very interesting public-private partnership called Click Foundation, which actually has brought together a lot of demand from the oil importers in Switzerland, which are subject to some regulation that they need to offset the emissions from the oil that is used in Swiss transport. So very effective approach, very interesting, absolutely front-running. Then Sweden. And Sweden is a very interesting case because, European Union doesn't like international carbon markets these days. So the EU NDC doesn't allow international carbon credits. The NDCs of the EU member countries don't allow either. But Sweden has a national target that goes beyond the NDC. And therefore, they can now, for the increment, actually use international carbon market credits. And Sweden is also now a front runner in also capacity building, but also generating deals. So, of course, at some point, I would think that the European Union needs to give up its opposition against use of international carbon market credits. The question is only when. Will it be in 2 years? Will it be probably when the pressure on the CBAM diplomacy increases? I don't know, but it will be an interesting few years in the European carbon market space.
Thank you, Axel. Talking about you are just mentioning the South cooperation, and I would like to turn to Will, saying that we understand that there is a deal between Cambodia and Singapore, and even if Singapore is not really a South country, but it's an important actor. Could you tell us more about this deal and how it's feel with the Article 6.2 and?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with all of the details, but I think this is an example.
Don't have the time for that, maybe.
This is an example. I mean, it's moving fairly quickly, but it's an example of kind of early moving to get things right. Like I said before, on the demand end of things, I think Singapore is sending very important signals by not only getting into the space and just creating an example of any kind of movement, but doing so in a way that pushes towards the high end of integrity. I think that's exactly what we need to see. For their part, Cambodia has done as complicated as many things are in that country, including in the forestry space, where there's been high historical deforestation, and it's a place where CI has worked for decades. It's not an easy place to change the economic and social factors underlying deforestation, there are solid projects there that deeply benefit the communities and have the involvement of the government. And this is a good opportunity to drive resources towards those things. So I think it's a welcome development, but it's one that we need to sort of continue to watch and learn from.
Yeah, I understand that Singapore has a lot of discussion with other countries and signing agreement with other. Maybe I see that Romain, we want to ask something on that.
Yes, no, not exactly on that, but I have a question for Will. So I'm in the panel, but I think, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Mustafa?
please.
No, I wanted to, CI is a developer, so you're implementing and developing carbon credit project. So I wanted to have your point of view on the kind of tension between accessibility and accuracy. Because these last months, responding to scrutiny and criticism, standards have upgraded their methodologies, which is probably a good thing, but it makes them also more complicated. So more, the developer will rely more on very specific expertise, and it may imply that some few small-scale projects, let's say farmers or fishermen, coastal communities will have less access to this mechanism. So what is the good balance? How can you deal with this tension?
That's an extremely important trade-off to point out. I think so two things are true. There are no easy answers in the nature-based solution space because it fundamentally involves land use and many different interests for the land, sometimes frequently conflicting and things like that, as Hyman alluded to earlier. But it is also true that at a planetary scale, there are gigatons of additional emissions reductions that without those, we will fail to achieve anywhere close to Paris climate targets. So we have to do something. That's not a space we can avoid working. And the vast majority of that additional potential that exists is completely untapped. It's underfinanced, and we have to solve this problem. So I think the gentleman from KfW, I believe, made the point that, which to me seemed obvious, but I think it actually does merit stating, you shouldn't be doing carbon projects or selling offsets if there is not a credible climate outcome. So there's a conflict here, right? Because you have to bring finance to support people, particularly smallholders that have serious barriers to entry, but in order to mobilize that funding and increase the access, you can't lower the standard to where you're not getting a genuine climate outcome. So I think that points us to where the answer has to lie. The burden is on us, researchers, development banks, NGOs, civil society, the private sector, to help find ways that bring the capacity, work through the processes of negotiating free prior informed consent, readiness of communities to participate in programs in association with the development of any program, so that the accessibility is kind of built into it. It's not easy work to do, but I think leaving out smallholders is not an option. It's unfair to them, and it's not going to allow us to meet the needs of addressing climate change.
Thank you, Will. I would like maybe to come back to one subject about the integrity and also the capacity of PDBs to engage this market. So, Ewan, what do you think about are you optimistic about the capacity of, for example, of these actors, kind of actors, which are the public banks, to improve and to integrate this carbon market in their business, and how institutions like yours could help on that?
Well, my personal view is that it's optimistic. Even during the COP28, we've seen multi-development bank announcing the joint statement of increasing the climate finance and reiterating the importance scaling up the finance. And as I accidentally walked in Pavilion, I went, Asian Development Bank also has a carbon fund ready. And as a VCMI, actually we have a policy team sitting there. We've, as mentioned, we have a country contact group working with and have facilitating with the regional initiatives such as the West African Alliance, who's not here today. But yeah, I find it optimistic as the world is gradually trying to be collaborative and put the resources together to deal with the climate crisis. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Do you want to add something on what you heard and what is your maybe some added value
my last
on
takeaway?
Yes.
Actually, I think getting maybe public development banks on policy loans in order to make countries understand what are the stakes on those markets, which is a very important point. And as a modeler, I would say at a country level, I would do like a carbon modeling and forward-looking carbon modeling because of what I was mentioning about the interoperability of markets and getting their competitiveness issues on trade. And as explained, just to give an explanation to the assistants here, as explained by Axel. Now, for example, there is countries where ETS market is linked to voluntary market. And then there is the equivalence adjustment on CBAMs as well, which are coming. Maybe the American Pollution Act would act in different ways of compensating, like cleaning up carbon balance sheets. So I think it's a very broad view, but I think it's really important for countries to figure out all of this implications on getting the carbon intensity of their economies in the right way and the right direction of their development pathways. Thank you.
Thank you, Dejiga. And I think that's important also to keep this balance between bureaucracy and accuracy and also integrity. It is important. Thank you very much. I don't see any. I would like maybe to know if in the audience there are questions. Yeah, I see somebody on the back of the room. Have any question? Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, Mark Purdon. I'm with the University of Quebec in Montreal, chair in decarbonization. I guess I just have a quick question, and it's hearing the panelists' thoughts on. In some carbon markets we have in Quebec and California, we have a carbon price floor. Do you think that type of mechanism could be used in the voluntary carbon markets and Article 6 as a means of sort of stabilizing prices and improving development outcomes?
Who want to address this question? I see Alex raising hand.
Well, thanks, Mark. It can be done in compliance markets. We've seen it in the auction systems. We've seen it in the UK. So there are no problem. But how in the atomistic voluntary carbon market you would get a floor price? Because, well, we have the plethora of standards, the plethora of different qualities, and how, you know, the World Bank once tried to have this exchange rate system, the Network Carbon Market Initiative. It never worked, so this will not work on the voluntary carbon market.
Somebody to, please.
I would just add that the sort of two different outcomes that I alluded to earlier, that given the variation in cost across space, you can either save a lot of money and do the same amount of mitigation or do a lot more mitigation for the same amount of money, and you want to bias towards that second one. Having a price floor is one of the kind of structural decisions that you can make to ensure that you're driving towards the second more favorable outcome. There are others, such as quotas, where only a set percentage of emissions can be compensated via emissions trading or offsets, price collars, ratios at which offsets or emissions transfers need to be done, but price floors is certainly one of them. I agree that it's not clear how that one in particular might happen in the VCM, but it is an important option.
Thank you. Other questions in the room?
I may have one last question.
Please.
A question to VCMI on fossil fuel companies? I mean, we are in Dubai, so I think it's an important question. Well, how do you deal with the situation, the decarbonation path potentially from these companies? Could they be certified like? Yes. No. What about the demand from fossil fuel companies? Could they be VCMI? I don't know, to say compliance, or do you have a specific offer to this kind of companies?
So the approach that we are taking is, or if the company wants to make a VCMI claim, they should meet foundation criteria, which requires companies to set near-term targets following SBTi or the equivalent standards. If the fossil fuel company can set a near-term target, following the target setting body's standards, then in that case, they will be able to use the credits. But I think, as we all know, the fossil fuel company has a very high emissions of the hard to abate sectors, and so I think my opinion would be different measures should be taken, and enough guardrail should be made.
Thank you. Other question in the room? So I see none. I would like to close the panelists. Maybe I'll say a few words to wrap up this meeting, just to say that it's worth noting that there is a new enthusiasm on the carbon market, that's for sure. But there are also a lot of very serious challenges before us. And we experienced in the past the carbon markets rocketing and going down. So we don't want to see it again. I mean, we would like to see the market carbon going forward. So some IDFC members launched some initiatives, and we heard of that from IFC, IFD, and KfW, that need to be developed and to produce the expected outcome. And I think that it will be important to have the same meeting, the side event next year, and discuss about this outcome and to see if where we are. Thank you very much for your presence despite the late slots. Thank you.